Thank you all for being here. I once, in fact, in this room, was with a guy named Elon Musk, and he took a lot of credit for this thing called the algorithm, which is a 5-step process for how to make something more efficiently, how to really change the world. That was great, but the real person behind the algorithm was a person who back then, no longer, nobody stays forever in this place, was president of Tesla. He has written a book, partly because I nudged him a bit a couple of years ago. I said, why don't you take credit, why don't you take responsibility for explaining the algorithm? So this is a how-to algorithm, not just for manufacturing electric vehicles or rocket ships that go to Mars, but how to live your life. The algorithm is something you can use in your head to make your personal, professional life better. And one of the great entrepreneurs of our city, most of you know, is Scott Wolfe. If you don't know his entrepreneurial chops, you know him as the son of Jane Wolfe, who runs Melba's Eats, right, which is a combination po' boy place and laundromat, but actually an entrepreneurial workshop and reading and literacy workshop in, I think, the 7th Ward, and yeah, whatever.
Maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, Scott has done Level Set and other great companies, but more importantly, he's become a mentor of great companies being developed in New Orleans. So there's really no better combination than the two most entrepreneurial and innovative people I know, Jon McNeill, whose book, The Algorithm, you can buy, and Scott Wolfe. Thank you all.
Thank you, Walter.
Walter. All right. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I am too.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
And, you know, when they asked me to moderate this, I was really excited to meet you because of, you know, actually what it is the vast scope of your experience. It's this enormous, like you have launched startups, you're launching startups now with a venture studio, with some really impressive ones, but then also working for these organizations that are, you know, like a board director at General Motors, where you're what? This is a 100-something-year-old company.
Yeah.
You said Ross Perot, in the book, you say Ross Perot says you can get, it's like trying to get an elephant to tap dance.
Right, exactly.
But then also working at Tesla, as president there, reporting directly to Elon Musk, working as CEO of Lyft. So much perspective around innovation, and it was exciting. So I want to zero in on maybe the most electric one, which is, you know, Tesla, and your experience there. And it's interesting because your time there was right before Elon became this most important, or this most talked about person on the planet.
Yeah.
And so, like, as you think about that, what do you think people get wrong about Elon?
We're going to dive right in, Scott. So when people ask me, like, what would I be surprised about Elon, a couple things come to mind. First of all, he may be the funniest person I've been around. I haven't left meetings crying because I was laughing so hard so often than with him. This does not come out in his public persona much because he's so nervous and awkward when he is in public, but when he's relaxed in a safe zone for him, he is hilarious, really funny. And I didn't expect that going in. I expected this hard-driving, ruthless entrepreneur that everybody had read about. I think the second thing is when he's in a zone, how prolific he is. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example that I asked him what success looked like, and he said, well, success is getting me back to my first love, which is rockets. So get me down to 1 day a week at Tesla. And I said, well, how are we going to do that? And he said, we need to do a Vulcan mind meld. And I said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, for the same set of inputs, you would come out with the same decision as I would, which is really, I was like, well, what if it's not the right decision? What if I come up with something better? He's like, well, I just want to know that we're like melded. So I said, how are we going to do that? He said, let's travel together, let's be together nonstop, 24 hours a day. So like literally my second or third week, we fly to Hong Kong and we land and it's a 14 or 15-hour time difference. So we would get picked up in Model S's. It was our only product at the time. And he's a very big guy, and we would both be in the back seat. So he was taking like 3/4 of the back seat, and I was scrunched against the door, and we got our phones out. We're trying to catch up on email. And he turns to me, and he's watching me, and he says, how many words a minute can you type with your thumbs? I don't know. How many can you type on the keyboard? I knew that answer from high school typing class, so I was like 80. He said,
very good.
He said, your thumbs will do 18 words a minute if you're the average human being. So we've actually slowed down the input to the compute. I hadn't thought about that before. And then he said, what if we could speed up the input to the compute? And I said, well, obviously, if you speed up the slowest step in a system, the system goes faster. He said, what if you could think into the compute? I said, that would probably be fastest. And he turned to his chief of staff, who was in the front seat. His name was Sam at the time. And he said, Sam, get me to the top 5 scholars in neurocomputer interface, and I want to read their papers while we're here in Hong Kong, and then when we're back in LA next week, I want to meet with them. And so Neuralink was born out of that discussion in the backseat with how fast your thumbs are going. The next day, we're in a tower in Hong Kong. We're over, and he's an introvert, and so it didn't take me but a few days to figure that out, like how introverted he was. So we'd been meeting with people all day, and I knew he needed a break. So he just walked over to the window to look out over Kowloon Bay, and I left him alone there for a little bit so he could like recharge a little bit. And then I walked over to him, and I said, how you doing? And he said, well, you ever notice that cities are built in 3D, but roads are built in 2D? No, I've never noticed that. Strike two. What are you thinking about that? And he said, well, look at Kowloon Bay and look at all the traffic that's backed up in these bridges trying to get across the bay. He's like, what if you could make the roads 3D? And I said, well, how would you do that? And he'd said, well, you could tunnel, and you could make the roads go multiple levels in multiple directions, and you could relieve traffic. And I'm all right. We got to go meet with this Hong Kong official. And he was like, I don't want to go. I want to think about this problem. So he calls this engineer that's his favorite engineer at SpaceX. The guy's name's Steve. And I said, don't call him now. It's like 2 a.m. He's like, no, Steve will be up. So he calls Steve. He's like, Steve, can you in the next 5 or 6 hours find out everything you can find out about tunneling? Because I have an idea. And Steve's like, sure. So 5 or 6 hours later, they're on the phone, and Steve says, Elon, I found out I found out 2 things. One is tunneling machines haven't been improved in the last 50 years in terms of their rate of kilometers per hour that they can drill, or proportion of a kilometer per hour. But he said the other interesting thing I found out is the radius of a tunneling machine is 12 meters typically, and a 12-meter tunnel doesn't require cement to reinforce it. So you can remove one step of the process that everybody believes is necessary. So the Boring Company was formed 24 hours later, and I think that's the second surprise of working with him, is just like he would get into these zones where he was more like Da Vinci than an Edison.
Yeah, so prolific and so like thinking. And you get into it in the book, actually, in a few points. And actually, a lot of the algorithm comes into thinking about how he looks at, or not just him, how you can look at all these different things. And before we jump into that, to finish up on this Elon thread, what would you change about Elon? And maybe you can even think about, because you've worked with so many CEOs and so many leaders, worked with them as the number 2 COO at Lyft, worked General Motors, looking at Lululemon. I mean, what these leaders are successful too in many cases, successful. Right? Yeah. So what would you change about Elon?
Walter writes about this in his book. He says that Elon's brother got all the empathy genes and Elon got none, and Elon would agree with that. He's got 0, and his brother's the nicest guy you'd ever meet. I'd give him a little more empath genetics, for sure. And then there were times when I said to him, I just want to slow your clock speed down like a half a cycle. Mm-hmm. Because often you're moving so fast, you're not considering the ramifications of what you do, and oftentimes you're making decisions that are essentially, you're shooting our company in the foot, and we're having to respond. And I would love you to slow down a half a cycle just to think about second-order effects of what's about ready to come out of your mouth. That discussion was really led then to an extra job I had, which was screening tweets for the period of about 2 years before they went out. But those are the two things. Like, I'm sure, like, if you gave him that question for me, he'd have two things for me, just like all human beings. I think we all have gaps that would be helpful if we didn't have those gaps.
Right.
Yeah.
He would probably come with them very quickly, too.
Oh, he would.
This one, this
He
one,
would.
and this one.
He would say, yeah, I have too much empath. In fact, he said that, and Walter wrote about that also in the book. Like, there was this point where he fired this guy that had nothing to do with the problem that he was trying to explore, and we stepped in, and he said to Walter later, the co-founder, JB and John, just are too empathetic. And so I'm sure that's what he'd say.
Let's talk about the algorithm a little bit here, with like where it came from. Because at some point you're sitting with Elon. I mean, the algorithm comes from Elon's point of view in the world, right? Or point of view about business. And so take us to the origin of that. When did you first notice that he had this particular way of running and operating, and that it clicked and you said, I'm going to use this. This applies in a lot of places.
So I would say, like, we were growing so fast. So when I joined Tesla, we had one product in about 10 countries and $2 billion in revenue. And 30 months later, 30 months later, we had $20 billion in sales, 5 products, 36 countries. So we 10x'd a business at scale in 30 months, which meant that we were doubling about every 8 months. And so I felt like this thing is growing so fast, it's going to need scaffolding. And we're going to need to, like, build a framework so people can make decisions without us, obviously, but still be culturally and financially and values-wise aligned to the business. So the algorithm is this 5-step process. It's really the operating system at Tesla, and to a certain extent SpaceX, that gets utilized every week. And it drives innovation. And it didn't really exist. There were principles that were kind of loosely followed, but we tried to put this into a framework, and about half the framework came from huge mistakes we made, where when we did a postmortem, we said, we will not do that again. And what was the root cause of that? And so there are these 5 steps, plus I write about 3 secret ingredients that you really need to use to make the algorithm work.
Right. It's not actually an algorithm.
It's not.
For the people
It's not.
They might not know.
It's more of a framework.
It's a framework. It's an operating framework to kind of apply to a lot of things.
Right.
In your view, right? Like, you think you can apply it to? Tell us what you think. Like how you think it applies outside of maybe just your straight down the fairway. I need to think about making the roads 2D instead of 3D.
Yeah. So maybe I'll explain what the algorithm is. I'll give you the 5 steps, and then we'll give you an example of like So the 5 steps are, first of all, you question every requirement of the problem or business or situation that you're in. And I'll give you a couple examples of that in a second. Once you question every requirement, you tend to pull out a bunch of requirements, and so you're in the first phase of simplification. So you hear physicists especially talk about first principles, and the thought here is that first principles in physics teaches you to simplify so that you can solve enormously complex problems, and you can only do that by simplifying. And most humans don't simplify because it's too much work. You know the old Mark Twain line, I would have written you a shorter letter if I'd have taken the time. It's that principle. So you start by ripping out false requirements, dumb stuff that everybody believes to be true, but when you scratch the surface, it's not true. So that helps you simplify. Then once you've removed requirements, then you remove every step in the process that you can. And we had this rule, if you haven't deleted enough until you have to start adding back. So you have to be really aggressive. Then once you have a stripped down process and stripped down requirements, then you build the new process. Once you get that thing humming manually, which is ironic for tech people to say, you add speed to it manually, because if you cannot get speed out of a process, unless it's entirely worked out and it's delivering high quality. So this is counterintuitive, but a lot of people say good, fast, or cheap, pick two. That is absolutely error thinking. You should get all three if you've got a process designed well. And then the last step is you automate. The very last step. So I'll give you an example of a couple of these. So we were literally sleeping in the factory trying to fix this problem on production problem on Model 3. And the reason this is important is because we literally had no money. The people that were predicting Tesla's demise in like 2017, 2016 were pretty correct.
Close.
They were pretty correct. We were operating the company on 90 days of cash, but we had 70 days of payables. So that meant we had like 2 to 3 weeks of cash. And so things were to the wire all the time. And we had to get the Model 3 out to give us the cash flow to get over that threat of bankruptcy. And we couldn't produce Model 3s. And the reason we couldn't produce Model 3s was that Elon at the time had gotten in love with this notion of being the alien dreadnought, the machine that creates the machines. Anybody remember that? Mm-hmm. And so he took on the responsibility to build the Model 3 factory digitally. And so they designed the entire factory digitally. And then when it started to appear in real life, I was walking down the floor and I went, oh God, what have we done? The machines, one example was the machines were so close together in this digital world that they never thought about the machines breaking, needing maintenance, and a human being needing to get into the machine. There was no room for a human body to get in and maintain machines. So stuff was breaking, cars were falling off the trays. We couldn't produce out of that line because we had automated first, not last. That's where that last rule came from. It was $1 billion mistake. So we went back to thing one, which was, okay, let's question every requirement, every part that's in the Model 3, let's delete parts, let's delete process steps. And to save the company, one of the guys on the team, Jerome Guillen, said, I'm going to build a tent in the parking lot, and we're going to produce Model 3s in the parking lot. So he builds this tent over the weekend. And in most car factories, you have all kinds of conveyors and everything bringing the parts to the line, because there are 10,000 parts that are going to meet that car within 10 minutes of it being produced. So the conveyance systems are super complex. So we would have all the parts come into a warehouse about an hour and a half away. We would break those parts down. Robotic, like little train cars would grab those parts and deliver them to the line, and the factory was like a buzz. We couldn't do that in a tent. Mm-hmm. So Jerome just had the trailers with the parts on them, the truck trailers parked next to the tent's walls, this big long rectangle. And when people needed a part, they'd just walk onto the truck and grab a part and bring it to their workstation. And it completely simplified the design of a factory. And in fact, if you look at the factories in Shanghai and Austin now, they're built like the tent. The trailers just come to the outside. No more conveyance, no more warehouses, no more robots. And so we started to build the Model 3 manually, and we started with 50 cars a week, and then 100 cars, and then 500, and the goal was to get to 5,000 a week so we could get financially viable. And we weren't going to automate anything until we got there. And when I described that process to Jeff Wilke, who was running Amazon at the time, he said, oh, that's exactly how we started Amazon. Mm-hmm. We ordered books from local bookstores, and we went down and bought the books and then stuck them in a box, and we learned the process. And when I met Stanley Tang, one of the co-founders of DoorDash, he said, that's exactly how we started DoorDash. We put a PDF of menus up on a web page with a phone number, and the phone number rang in our dorm room, and we would go to the restaurant and pick up the food and deliver it and so we knew the workflow. And once you design that workflow and can speed it up, then you can automate it. And that's kind of the framework that we're talking about.
And it's funny how you put that last as the last step, and you say do that one last, but it's actually really a first step in a way.
Yeah.
And so if there's people here thinking about like starting a company or being an entrepreneur, the thing is, because I run into this when I'm advising entrepreneurs, I find that the intuition is always, or so often, to try to automate or try to design processes before you just go in and just like use sticky tape and glue and put it together and figure it out. At our company, we had the same success, the same story of our success, which is we did so many things manually and then figured it out and automated it. And it always is curious to me, and I'm curious as to your impression, why are people so allergic to doing it manually, especially because you're launching startups and advising these companies. I'm sure you run into it just like I do. People just want to like automate it first. They want to go to the process first. Why is that?
I think there's a couple things. My impression is that most human beings are complicators, not simplifiers.
Yeah, it's probably true.
So they'll rush to solutions, even though the solutions might be right, and they start to automate, and then they add complexity on top. And the challenge is when you automate first, you can't get rid of the complexity because it's kind of like set in concrete. Mm-hmm. And you got to go in there with a jackhammer then and get rid of all this what's called technical debt. And so I think, and because of a lot of our technologists who start these companies, we default to, hey, I know this could be this great tool, and we start to slap tools together, and before you know it, we've automated something, and it can go faster and grow faster, et cetera. And there's this real resistance, I think, to going slow before you go fast. And there is this notion, actually, that I was sitting with Steve Jobs as chief of staff a couple of weeks ago, and he was the first product manager on the iPod. And I said, how did you and Steve work on product? And he said, we would take a week or two to design the 2 or 3 things, or determine the 2 or 3 things that needed to be true about the product. And once we hit those, we locked them down, and that was the simple architecture that everybody's going to follow. I said, okay, what was that for the iPod? He said, you got to get in the Wayback Machine because there was no solid-state disk drives and stuff like that. And Steve said, I want it to be the size of 2 fingers. I want it to hold 1,000 songs, and I want it to be able to get to those songs in 4 seconds. And that took a week for them he and James to get to that point. James is the guy I was talking to. And James said that then super accelerated the rest of the product development cycle because people would come and say, hey, Samsung's got an FM radio on their music player. And they would say, is that 1,000 songs in 4 seconds? And they would say, no, okay, out of the product. But what it forced the engineers to do is they had to design for the first time solid-state disk drives that would hold 1,000 songs. They had to design an OS that was super efficient, could go search index those songs within 4 seconds with just a wheel of a thumb. And I find that is an inspiring example, again, of this, like if you slow down up first and simplify the definition of the product, then you can build. Mm-hmm. But when you start with, hey, let's do this fancy thing with tech and this fancy thing with tech, you tend to get all discombobulated.
Yeah, it's funny because when you read your book, it has a lot of things that you even just did it now. You're talking about automate, and then you got to simplify, right? And so, because all these steps really blend together,
they do, and
they're selling this singular story. I love the story in the book around under the simplify section around the shopping cart experience at Tesla and trying to get it from like 25 or 30 steps and just to get it down to less steps. But the thing that's curious to me is like this goes to the same kind of question as before is it is obvious to have less steps in a shopping cart, right? So why, what I don't get with those things is like, what is it that, if it's so obvious, what is the thing that makes this difficult in an organization?
So I'll tell the story that Scott's hinting at. So, but I think the key is in the context, Scott. So this car company, Tesla, had started, and they wanted to do everything anti-dealer. Not against the dealers, just like nobody likes to go to a car dealership, nobody likes the shopping experience. It's worse than going to the dentist, and so we want to do everything anti that. And so we created, this car company was created, and the idea was you could go to a store that intersected you in your daily life. And so we would put stores in malls, and we would intersect you on your way to the movies or on your way to dinner, and you didn't have to go to a dealership row. So that was the anti-dealership thing, first step. Second step is that rather than just getting one of the cars that was on the lot, you could order a completely custom car built and made for you. And that meant you had infinity selections, basically, in configurations of cars. You could choose the interior color, the exterior color, cloth seats, leather seats, the number of motors, whether it had ludicrous mode or not, all this stuff. It was completely customizable. And that was the calling card. And so in 2017, we started to ask ourselves, we started to question the requirement of, did we have to sell only physically in stores? And so Elon and I were in a riffing session. We had a riff session basically every week together. And he said, I'd like you to figure out how we sell cars online. And I said, well, nobody's going to buy a $100,000 thing sight unseen online. And he said, yeah, but we got to figure out why, like what it would take. And so we both are oriented around something called customer friction. Anytime you put friction in front of a customer, it's a bad thing because in this case, it slows down the sales process. So he said, if we put our car sales online, how many clicks would it take to buy a Tesla? So we counted them up, and it was 64. And he said, hey, just for fun, pull out the Domino's app. How many clicks does it take to get a Domino's pizza? At the time, it was 10. So he's a big goal setter, ambitious goal setter. He said, okay, get it down to 10. So I came back to him a week later. I'm like, 44 of the clicks are in the financing process. And so, again, this was 64 clicks because it was a process that was made for brick and mortar, not envisioned for digital. So you get in a digital world, and now you're like, oh, God, this is not going to work. So the first step in the algorithm is question our requirements. So we'd question, can we sell cars online, not just in stores? And then we repeated this when we got to the 44 clicks that were in the financing process. I asked our legal team, there's this great guy named Phil. I said, Phil, can you figure out in a loan document, which is 12 pages long for a car, how many of these paragraphs are a requirement of law or of regulation? And he came back after a few days and he said, out of the 12 pages of loan documents, exactly 2 paragraphs are the requirement of law. 12 pages of paragraphs that were developed by well-meaning corporate attorneys trying to save their bank some liability. And over time, it's like the Talmud. It just keeps building and building and building until you can't even see the core of the document anymore. And so we said, okay, first principles, what is a loan document for a car supposed to do? It's supposed to say, here's the price of the car, here's the interest rate, here's the period of time, and therefore here's your monthly payment. Sign here if you agree to this. That can be said in 1 paragraph. So Elon said, that's brilliant. Let's get a 1-click loan. And I said, exactly what I was thinking. I think this is going to be hard. So we went and talked to every bank under the sun, and they all slammed the door in our face and told us we were crazy, didn't believe that these paragraphs in a loan document weren't required. And finally we got to this bank in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, U.S. Bank, and the CEO was really entrepreneurial at the time, and he said, I'll do it. I'll give you a 1-click loan and a 1-click lease. And so we started manually do step 2 of the algorithm. Let's manually plot this out. Let's speed it up, and then we'll automate it. And we got into a 1-click loan and lease. And all of a sudden, we had increased sales 20% because people were buying these things online, sight unseen. We had to change the configuration of the product. You couldn't order custom anymore. It turned out when you did the analysis, people really ordered 2 cars, a base car and a performance car. And so we just started to sell models, pre-configured models, online with a 1-click loan release. And we got down to 13 clicks. We couldn't get down to 10, but we got down to 13. And today, I think if you pull up the Tesla apps, still the same thing we developed in 2018. It's just 13 clicks, and you got a car on its way to you. And that is the algorithm in action. You're just completely, every week, you're like, why does this work this way? Why does this work this way? How could we make it better?
And what's interesting to me about this is that you have things that are obvious. Everybody.
In retrospect.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
While we have a shopping cart, it would be great if somebody didn't have to go through 75 clicks to get to it, right?
Yeah.
And it's really this, when you look at different parts of the algorithm, or it's simplify. Everybody walks around saying, let's simplify. Or a question every requirement is just asking why 5 times. I mean, they've been doing that at Toyota or whatever the company is.
The 5 whys.
Yeah, the 5 whys.
Yeah.
So it's hard as a leader. So if I'm Elon Musk and I'm sitting there saying, I have 12 different ways that people can order cars, you know what, let's only give them 2. And you have a multi-billion-dollar business, right? This is hard to do.
That was a really hard decision, actually.
Right,
yeah.
Right, of course, because you don't really know what's going to happen. And it doesn't sound like Elon's the kind of guy who goes and tests things, just says, let's do it.
No, he doesn't believe in testing.
Right.
Yeah, he doesn't believe in A/B testing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what has to be, there's challenges here. There's challenges here for leadership, and for how do leaders lean into the things that they may even know because they know the 5 whys and they know simplicity. They know things that you structure with the algorithm. But there's got to be things true about the leader and true about the organization that enables this to happen. So what gets in the way, and how do people overcome that?
That's a really good question. I'm just thinking that decision is maybe a good encapsulation of this. So the first discovery we made was we couldn't have like an infinity number of configurations. And so when we ran the numbers, the team came to me and said, hey, people really only buy 2 configurations of the car. So my first stop was I went and I grabbed 2 of my partners in crime on the management team, guy that ran engineering, guy that ran manufacturing. And I said, hey, I got to talk to you guys about something I think is going to be controversial, because I know built into the DNA of this company is we do custom made to order. And I know I'm the new guy, but let me show you what the data says. The data says we only really sell 2 of these configurations. And right now there are 300,000 possible configurations that can go through the factory. And what if it was 2? And the factory guy's eyes lit up and he's like, thank God. Because it's a lot easier to produce 2 of something than 300,000 of something. He said, do you know what that would do to the factory? Do you know what that would do to the supply chain? Totally simplify our business. And the CFO happened to be walking by, so he pops down, he's listening to this discussion. He's like, you know what that would do to working capital, not to have parts for 300,000 things? We'd free up a bunch of working capital. And the head of engineering is like, do you know what that would do for product design and testing? It totally simplifies the business. We're in. So with some trepidation, all 3 of us, we locked elbows and we walked into the management team meeting that week. And I said, Elon, I know I'm new here. Looks like we don't have to make 300,000 of these things. We can make 2. And the co-founder who was in the room said, you don't understand, man, our DNA is made to order. And I said, well, our DNA is made to order. I get that, which is why this is a hard decision. But our future is not. We don't have a future in made to order. We're not going to do 1 million cars made to order. And here's what the customer data says. And in that culture, people are both wildly curious, but they're wildly rational too. And when you present a rational, cogent argument, like here's the data of what people will buy, that won the day. Like Elon gets into this mode where he goes silent for a while and he's just like a human computer processing, and he went silent staring at that page, and he looked up and said, this is the right thing to do. That's unique, because I think in a lot of cultures people say, no, this is the way it's been done, or this is a religious conviction we have about being made to order. We're not going to let it go. And there's a real ability in that culture to step away from the status quo and imagine something different. And it's unique there.
I like the word status quo. And you have a sentence somewhere in this book around, like, when you apply these 5 steps, it produces radical rethinking. And that radical rethinking forces you really to question the status quo. And what's interesting for like the BookFest crowd, as I was talking to you a little while ago, is I'm walking around going to these different sessions, and there's a lot of intellectual thought around questioning the status quo, or trying to change or pushing on the status quo. And so the question is a little bit around this, which is, you know, if it does, what would you tell you are an execution expert, and there's a lot of execution stuff that would benefit to push on the status quo. And even Elon jumped into the government, right, and tried to throw the algorithm into the government to try to shake up the status quo. What do you tell them? What's your perspective on that? What's your perspective on if the algorithm can reshake create radical thinking to question the status quo? This question of status quo can be great in a lot of instances, and it can produce a lot of really great outcomes. Where are some gaps in that, or where does that produce stress, and how do organizations? Because it could be organizations that have really old cultures, like, I don't know, I'm not going to use General Motors because we know they have a great, okay, maybe General Motors, but you also have organizations that aren't even companies and have all kinds of complicated motives, like governments.
I don't know that this works in government. Exhibit A, Doge. I don't think it works in government, but I do think the ingredients of why this works in business context, where I've seen it and applied it, is you've got competitive pressure, market pressure. You cannot sit on your laurels for very long without that really costing you and the company. And so you've got to keep a pace of innovation moving. And if you don't, my experience is you're going to get your head handed to you sooner rather than later. So there's a certain pressure in business to keep things moving so that the organization survives. And I watch Mary Barra, who in a lot of ways is similar to Elon, but almost the antithesis of Elon's personality too. She's such an effective leader. So you mentioned GM. It's a 130-year-old company with a very set way of doing things. It actually was invented by Alfred P. Sloan in the 1920s and 30s. And that you can understand everything you need to know about GM's culture about reading Sloan's book called My Years at General Motors, because it's the organization he set up, it's the cultural norms, it's the metrics. And she stepped in and said, I don't know that we've got a future in just gas cars. We've got to commit to EVs. It's a better driving experience. It's a better product at the end of the day. There's less maintenance. You don't have to go to the gas station. You can fuel at home. And so she moved this organization into considering being an EV company. And then she started to deploy the algorithm in our first EV, which was the Hummer EV. We took this car that nobody would guess would be an EV because it was associated with the biggest gas guzzler machine you could buy. And we gave a team of very young leaders. The lead of that team was 36, 37 at the time. His name's Josh. And we said, all rules are off. You guys can go build this car. It took us typically 36 months to go from idea to car coming off the line. They did it in 14 months in a wildly complex vehicle that the company had never produced before. And she now runs the engineering meetings on a weekly cadence, just keeping that process moving forward. Mm-hmm. And so you can do this, I think, even in older, larger organizations. We do this in startups, but I haven't seen it really work in government. That's a completely different beast. And there's not the competitive pressure that you have in the business realm there. Right.
And even in organizations, there's a lot of tension and cultures that make this hard. You can have the leader who may not be really conducive to question the status quo and pushing on the status quo or being scared of certain things.
Yeah.
You can have the organization, which I'll get to in a second, and then you can have the team members too, where the leader wants to do it, but now they have to try to get how do I get the whole army to because those people don't like to question the status quo sometimes as well. With organizations, it was interesting with the Hummer example, or maybe it was the Bolt example, and you wrote something in the book around you've never seen it happen when it wasn't structured a certain way. It ring a bell? It's when it was. So, what is the structure that you see that works when the algorithm has some space to breathe?
So this works when leadership. It comes from leadership, and leadership lives this. Mm-hmm. And so, I've seen this work where. I think I was talking with some friends at breakfast this morning about the thing that I think people will write about Musk's companies in 10 or 20 years, about how he did this. So we're going to, at some point, we're going to do the retrospective on him like we did on Sloan and Welch and some of their other great industrialists. But the secret ingredient that he applies is he has his companies working on a weekly cadence. And the way he does that is he determines the one or two existential issues that he believes could cause the company to go extinct, could cause an extinction event. And so the examples of those two right now at Tesla are, there is a belief, and I got to say we share the same belief at GM, and I've tried to evangelize this. There is going to be a moment in the next 5 or 10 years where cars are going to go through their flip phone to iPhone moment. Raise your hand in the audience if you have a flip phone. There's usually 2, yeah. And there's 3. And there's a dumb phone movement right now, and I totally get that.
It's a protest phone.
But if you go the Wayback Machine, not long ago, 2010, the leading phone companies in the world were called Nokia, BlackBerry, and Motorola. And then this product came out that totally elegantly solved a lot of the constraints around smartphones and took over the market almost overnight, and that was the iPhone. And BlackBerry, Nokia, and Motorola's market caps didn't fall by like half, they went to 0. Those companies, for all intents and purposes, don't exist today, for all extent and purposes. And so that's like an extinction event that we worry about. And we think that in the car business, in the next 5 or 10 years, if a car comes out for the same price as the car you buy today, that will drive you, in other words, it's going to be a chauffeur, the market moves immediately to that, which is why there's such a race to autonomy and why there's such a concentration on that. Because we believe at GM, and I know Elon believes at Tesla, like if you do not have that technology, you will be extinct. And so he comes in every week and he meets with the autonomy team. A lot of times he does this almost every night. And when people have to present their progress on a weekly basis to the CEO, do you think they bring their B game? They bring their A game. So the company's working at A game on one issue. So it's not the entire company, it's not the company burning out or anything like that. But these teams are teams of like special forces, not regular army. So they're working intently on that one issue, making progress every week. And he is overseeing the progress. And that weekly cadence of attention by the CEO, I think, is the secret sauce that makes it work. And so you got to have executive buy-in on this. To not only buy-in, but leadership of it. Right.
We have like NOEW going on around the corner, the
World
Entrepreneur, which you did something with yesterday, which is great.
Yeah.
And we've been talking a lot about different efficiencies and different ways of challenging the status quo and pushing within an organization, a lot of big organizations. But this also works, because a lot of your examples in the book it's interesting, you go from a big organization to something you just launched from scratch, like a complete net new innovation. And I found that interesting around how, at first when you read this, it feels like I'm going to take something that exists, I'm going to push a bunch of pressure points and try to ask my 5 whys and question the requirements and simplify to try to make something more efficient or, to make something better within the organization. But you give a lot of examples of how it actually works on the net new side too. Let's make something from nothing. Yeah. And so talk a little bit about that. How does the algorithm work, and what are some great examples of the algorithm of how you approach nothing and then produce something?
So I'll give you 2 examples. One of my partners at our firm, so what we do is we invent companies from scratch. And one of my partners, his wife teaches at Columbia and the London School of Economics. So they're back and forth between New York and London a lot. And we're having dinner in New York one night, and we had a great meal, and then the check comes. And he looks down at the check and he says, what if every restaurant you went to looked like a London supper club? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, in a London supper club, there's no bill. You get up and leave when you're done with your meal. And they know who you are, and they know what you ordered, and they put it on your account. And there's no awkward moment at the end of the meal. And so we started this conversation, which is, why is there a requirement to have a bill paid at the end of the meal manually? And what if you could just get up and walk out? And it turns out there's a lot of technical challenges to that. And one is the structure of just the way the information systems work in restaurants. The reservation system that you use, so OpenTable or Resy or whatever, they know who you are, and they know what time you have a reservation. But once you sit down at the restaurant, what's called the POS takes over, the point of sale system. They don't know who you are, but they know what you ordered. And so we start to pull the string on this just sitting in the restaurant. We're asking the waiter, how do these systems work, et cetera. And we come to find out that there's this big gap between the two systems. So the people in the reservation systems business want to get your payment because that's where they believe they're going to make money. And so Amex buys Resy, and Visa does a partnership with OpenTable because they want to take that from reservation to payment. And the POS systems also want the payment. 90% of Toast money is made on the payment processing. So these two groups of technologists are at war with each other, what they believe is a mortal fight over the payment. And what didn't get built in that war was a system called a CRM, or basically a customer profile, that knows, hey, I like to go to this restaurant every Tuesday night. I tend to order this. I'd like to sit at this kind of table, and I like this kind of wine. And, oh, by the way, you know who I am, so you don't have to ask me for a bill. So we discovered this hole in the market, and we started to build a restaurant CRM, and that business has taken off because restaurants do want to customize and personalize the experience for you. And what they found out is that repeat business goes up 60% if you treat people with personalization. You know their favorites. You can know which patrons are coming in a restaurant in a given night, and that can help the chef construct the menu because he knows, hey, these people like chicken parm, so let's put chicken parm on the menu tonight. And let's feature this wine. And average ticket size goes up 20%. That whole business came out of, hey, what if you could get up from a meal and not have to pay?
Yeah, so the efficiency of the innovation argument is everywhere you are.
Everywhere you are,
you're sitting there go, why is this
Why does this work this way?
Right.
Exactly. And I think that's the way a lot of entrepreneurs, I'm definitely wired this way, is like, why does it, when you see hassle in life, like, why does that hassle exist? Mm-hmm. And then what could you dream up in terms of a new status quo?
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think anything gets lost in the pursuit of speed or the tackling against the status quo, the efficiency, and like, do you think where are the risks in applying the algorithm?
I think there are flaws in almost every framework, but I had an old mentor who said a lot of people look first for the flaws and then develop a destination dilemma, which is unless they can answer every question, they're not going to start. And he used to say to me over and over again, do not have a destination dilemma. Start, just start, just start. And I think this isn't a perfect framework, but as long as you start and follow, you're going to be further ahead than if you didn't. Elon gave the head of engineering and I this big challenge one day, big challenge. He said, go eliminate 50% of the cost of manufacturing the car. It's not 2%, it's not 5%, 50%. So the head of engineering and I go out and walk in the factory, and the way car factories are made, they're long rectangles that are basically divided in half, and they're about a mile long. And so if you sit in the middle, kind of at the 50-yard line, and you look right, there are hundreds of robots welding together the skeleton of the car. It's called the chassis. In that area, the factory is called the body shop. And so literally, we had 300 robots working in synchronicity, and it's a majorly cool thing to watch. And then when you look to your left, it's 5,000 people hanging parts off that skeleton that the robots made. So if you're standing there and you've now got a question in your head, how would I eliminate 50% of the cost? You can look right or look left and try to figure out which way to go. And so Doug, my counterpart in engineering, we were riffing on this problem for like 2 hours, standing on the scaffolding, looking over both sides of the car factory, and he said, I have an idea. But I'm not sure it will work. I want to think about it overnight. I want to give it to you in the morning. But I think I can find a way to eliminate 50% of the cost of the car. So the next morning we get together in a conference room, and he rolls a Matchbox car across the table. And he said, this is the answer. I said, what? This is a match? What? He said, this is the answer. These things are casted, not welded. And I said, yeah, they're casted because they're the size of your thumb. And you can pour molten metal into a mold the size of your thumb, and it will hold with a hell of a lot of pressure. But the physics will not allow you to produce a car-sized mold because that metal is going to be, there's so much of it, it's going to be so hot, it's 1,600 degrees, it will melt whatever mold you put it in, and the air pressure to hold it while it cools is enormous, and anything goes wrong, you would literally blow up the factory, there's so much air pressure. And he's like, I know, but I think we should start. Do you have anything we could melt? And I said, yeah, Doug, I got all these aluminum wheels that are seconds, they get scratch and dent, and we put them outside the back of the factory, and a recycler comes and gets them every week. We can melt those. He's like, awesome. So now we're like 8-year-old boys. And he's like, I can get a smelter, and you get the wheels, we'll throw them in, I'll get a few engineers, and we'll just start to build a mold, first the size of our thumb, then the size of our hand, then this big, then this big. And so we started this process where literally we're like melting, we're turning aluminum wheels into molten aluminum and pouring them into these molds, and these brilliant engineers are developing a bigger and bigger and bigger press casting machine to do this. And 8 months later, they had developed a casting that was, it's half the car. So you could have two opposing castings, and with two parts, you could now have the car. That eliminated the entire first half of the factory. All the robots, poof, gone. So now rather than building a factory for, say, $5 billion, now the factory is going to cost you $2 billion because most of the money was in the robots. So you could have half the factory footprint, less than half the factory cost, but more importantly, you eliminated half of the variable cost. And there was a secondary effect of when you're welding a skeleton together with 300 parts, you never quite get the alignment right. So when you go to hang doors and windows off of that imperfect skeleton, you have gaps and things don't look right and they don't fit right. But with two perfectly casted parts, you put those things together and the doors and windows are perfectly aligned. So we had a second order effect that was amazing. And that's an example of, I think you could find a flaw, which I did at the beginning of that process. Doug, here's why this won't work. And Doug was smart enough and grounded enough in this thing we now call the algorithm, where he said, I'm not going to get caught up in that and let that stop me. Let's go at least start to try something new. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, like, an academic thinker is going to find a lot of holes in the algorithm, but you're probably not going to be able to 20x a business from $2 billion to $20 billion in your career unless you have a framework that actually is proven like this.
With this framework, is there a part of it that was personally hard for you to come around on?
Yeah, the automate last.
The automate last.
Yeah,
the one sure. I told you, this one there.
Yeah, I started coding when I was 8 years old, and so that comes naturally to me. I'm like, oh, we could make this go faster. And I still have to like stop myself constantly from that instinct. Yeah,
the automate last is one that it seems I encounter that one all the time when I'm working with companies where their tendency is always to go in that direction.
Yeah.
So you have this. A lot of people work on things and they don't write a book about it, right? So why did you feel like you needed to get this on paper and get this explained? So Walter and I were getting to know each other for the Elon book, or is the process of his writing the Elon book. I asked Walter, why do you know, like, Walter, you're an experienced CEO. You ran Time Inc. at the height of Time Inc. You ran CNN, had to turn it around. As a CEO, why don't you tell us about the operating systems that run these businesses? Like Jobs there's an operating system. You go inside Apple, there's a way that thing runs. You go inside Microsoft, there's a way that thing runs. You go inside Tesla, there's a way that thing runs. And it'd be fascinating for us to have you describe how that thing runs. And Walter said, like he just said, like, you should write that book. And I said, I'm not your guy. Like, I'm not an author. But then as I thought about his challenge, I thought about there's a handful of books that
significantly impacted me in my career. And I was like, if this has a chance to help somebody innovate, I want them to know about it. And so that's what motivated me to sit down and start to write, was because I thought maybe like I was a 25-year-old kid and somebody handed me this book, The Goal, which I don't know if you've read it. It's by Ellie Goldratt. I see some heads nodding. That book changed my entire perspective on business and manufacturing. It taught me manufacturing. And it probably gave me 20 years of experience of the Japanese in one book. And I thought, man, if this book can be for some 25-year-old kid the equivalent of what The Goal was for me, that's why I want to write this down.
Yeah. And it really actually, you cite a few books that are really interesting, like The Goal, The Paradox of Choice. There's a lot of really...
Sam Walton's Made in America.
Sam Walton's Made in America.
Total must read.
And that's what's interesting about the algorithm. It really blends together a lot of these things that are, it's not necessarily net new. It's blending together all these practices and these perspectives and putting it into a framework,
right,
which all companies have in some way, shape, or form. Organizations that runs really well all look alike in some way.
Right.
They all have some kind of framework that makes it come together. I think it's the last page of the book, maybe 2 or 3 pages, the last two. You say that vanishingly few businesses can survive in today's day, because of how fast things change. You referenced the iPhone, for example, and maybe autonomous cars. And you say much less thrive by maintaining the status quo, which gets back to this real irritation around the status quo within organizations, right?
Totally.
And you say that the algorithm becomes actually a survival strategy. And that's an important reason to write the book too, is like help all these organizations survive. But maybe explain a little bit why you feel this way, of why the status quo has to be shaken, why things are moving so fast, why asking the 5 questions and making sure your culture is set up for that. Why is this such a manifest important thing for organizations today?
Well, I think we all feel like our world's accelerating. Everybody gets that sense right now. And an example that was about a year ago this time, I was standing in a factory in China that's called a lights out factory. So you may have heard this phrase, the lights out warehouse. Amazon kind of invented this phrase. They're called lights out warehouses because there's no lights. And there's no lights because no humans are inside. So it's all robotic. And so it's called lights out warehouse. And a year ago, I was standing in a lights-out factory in China where there are no human beings in a factory. Raw materials come in one end of the building, and robots build cell phones, and cell phones come out the other side. And this company is called Xiaomi. And Xiaomi is the most advanced, China's got some of the most advanced manufacturing going on in the world right now. It's mind-blowing. And so I watched this thing where there's a couple of human beings inside that are electricians that keep the thing running, and there's one person that can override the system if things start to go haywire. But they actually have a Kaizen team inside the factory that are AI agents. So there's an AI Kaizen team that's running this optimization model and making the factory better every day. And Xiaomi was putting the designs on their first car factory that's lights out. Think about that for a second. That's super duper complex. The reason half the factory is 7,000 humans is because you have to do all these complex moves that only humans can do to wire a car and put the parts on it. And they're working on this lights out car factory. And so, if I'm in the car business, this is a moment of existential choice. Mm-hmm. Do I maintain status quo? Do I try to improve 5% a year? Or do I try to leapfrog that?
Right.
And it's an existential question, and I think the survivor has to leapfrog. So you don't really get a choice of sitting in the status quo in a lot of these businesses because it's being done unto you. So you've got to respond. And so Elon came back from that trip similar time, and he made a completely different decision, which is essentially we're getting out of the car business. And so that's why you heard no more investment in supercharger, no $25,000 model. I'm putting all the chips into autonomy because that's the only way to survive, because the Chinese have already won on the manufacturing side. And other car manufacturers like GM were like, no, we can compete with that. We can leapfrog ourselves into a very different model, but we don't have a choice because that's been given to us by the marketplace, and we don't have a choice to stay in status.
Yeah, we have a few tiny seconds left. We're at the book festival. What are you reading?
Oh, great. I'm reading 3 books right now. I kind of read things. I have a little bit of ADHD, so I flip from book to book. So I'm reading Walter's book, The Greatest Sentence Ever Written. I'm reading Sorkin's book, 1929, and I'm reading a professor at HBS. His name's Mark Roberge, on the science of scaling startups. So those are the 3 things I'm reading right now.
Cool. We got 1929 showing you, what could
be happening
today.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the greatest
History
sentence that ever
repeating itself.
in
Yep.
Walter's book saying, it's going to be all right. Don't
Exactly.
worry.
That's why it's a good. They're an antidote for each other. They're really
right.
good. Yeah.
That's right. Well, cool. Well, thank you for coming. Thanks for this.
Thank you.
The book's The Algorithm. Go get it. Have fun.